Morning, everybody. We are not having service this morning. Basically, it's just already slippery outside, and the temperature is going to continue to drop, and it seems like it could be very slick and dangerous by the time service gets out. So it seemed much safer to just cancel, unfortunately. However, there is something that I felt like the Lord wanted me to share, and so if you're watching this right now, it's obviously it's up on the church YouTube page. But if you are seeking the will of God for your life, right? And this goes for individually. Every day you wake up, you spend time with the Lord, and He's going to guide you. He's going to lead you. He's going to reveal the purposes He has for you and the things that He is wanting you to do in life, the places He's wanting you to go. And the same thing is true for a local church corporately. Our church, we're always asking God what His will is, always asking God to just continue to lead us and guide us, and He does that. He does lead and guide and tells us what He wants us to do, how He wants us to do certain things. But those moments can be very discouraging at times. And there's two main ways that we can get discouraged when it comes to the things that God is leading us to do. If you feel the Lord very clearly leading you to do something or go somewhere or whatever, oftentimes it's not just up to you to decide to listen to God, right? What I mean by that is a lot of times God might be leading you to do something, but in order for you to be able to do it, there might be other people that also need to agree with you and maybe even allow you to do it. Or maybe there's other people that you need to help you do it, right? So a lot of times the things that He's leading us to do involve other people, right? Other people need to also hear God's voice in this situation and see what God is wanting to accomplish, right? And that can be very discouraging because you can't make anybody do anything, right? You can't make somebody see what God is trying to show them. And so it can be very discouraging at times. This also is the same way for the local church corporately. There might be things God is leading us as a church to do, right? Telling us that this is the direction He wants us to go in. But 95% of the time, when God is leading a church to do something, it's going to involve people. And maybe God is saying to do something, but you say, God, how are we going to do that? We don't have anybody that can do that. Or maybe, God, we don't have anybody that's willing to do that. So how are we supposed to accomplish your plans for our church when we just don't have the right person, or we just don't have anybody that's willing to take this on, right? And so that can be a huge obstacle. And like I said, the reason that can be so upsetting is because you can't control people. And there have been people that have tried. There are, every now and then, somebody tries to force people to do things. And unfortunately, this happens in the local church where, you want to start a ministry or you want to do this or that, and nobody's willing, nobody wants to. And so a lot of times what happens is, in the church is that people are guilt tripped, right? Maybe the leadership of the church basically guilts people and says, well, if you really cared about God, you would do this or you would do that. And it's a guilt trip. It's making people feel guilty, like, wow, maybe I'm not a Christian unless I volunteer to do this. And so they'll volunteer to do it, or even trying to force somebody. I mean, sometimes spiritual leaders abuse their authority in literally making somebody feel forced to do something. And that can work. Those two things can work. The problem is that they end in disaster. Because when you're talking about doing the will of God, if somebody is not doing it out of a willing spirit, it's going to end in disaster. And that's why a lot of times in church, you see people that get burnt out and they just quit and then they get bitter and they start to have resentment for the church because they're doing something that God never led them to do, and they end up hating it, and they may end up hating the church, and that happens more often than you might think. But the same thing if it's something that's in your personal life and God's leading you to do it, and somebody else needs to be involved, you can't. You could try to guilt them into helping you or something, but it's going to end in disaster. And so what we need to realize is when it comes to doing what God is leading, and it involves other people, you need to realize that there's nothing you can do. You can't make somebody do anything, right? And Moses realized that he was in this situation as well in Exodus 35 when God led Moses to have Israelite build the tabernacle and all the furniture and everything like that. In Moses 35 verse 4, it says, Moses said to all the congregation of the people of Israel, "This is the thing that the Lord has commanded. Take from among you a contribution to the Lord. Whoever is of a generous heart, let him bring the Lord's contribution." Right? So Moses knew we can't force these people to give to the Lord. We can't force it. It needs to be from a generous, willing heart that people give to the contribution of what God is wanting to build, right? So Moses kind of knew the same thing. So what happened? What did they do, right? You can't force people to do things that they don't want to do, and you shouldn't even try. So what ended up happening? Well, if we skip ahead to verse 20 of Exodus 35, it says, all the congregation of the people of Israel departed from the presence of Moses. And they came, everyone whose heart stirred him, and everyone whose spirit moved him, and brought the Lord's contribution to be used for the tent of meeting, and for all its service, and for the garments. God moved on people's hearts to be willing to do what needed to be done. And then we see down in verse 29, and all the men and women, the people of Israel, whose heart moved them to bring anything for the work that the Lord had commanded by Moses to be done, brought it as a free will offering to the Lord. When it comes to things that we know God is leading, but it involves other people, we can't change people's hearts. We can't make people do anything. But God can change people's hearts. God can touch people's hearts to give them a willing spirit to do the things that need to be done. And, I think about this often. I remember one place we were pastoring, things were difficult in a lot of ways. And, spiritual difficulty, maybe financial difficulty. And I went to the mailbox one day and there was a letter from like a random group. And I opened it up and there was a letter in it with money. And it said, we felt like the Lord was leading us, was wanting us to help you. God stirred their hearts up to send us this encouraging letter with this money. God can touch people's hearts. And so when you know God's leading you to do something, but it depends on other people also doing it, you need to say, God, you are leading me to do this. I'm trusting you to stir up people's hearts so that I can do what you're leading me to do. You need to just trust the one that can touch people's hearts. Trust that he will lead the right people to do what they need to do so you can be obedient to the will of the Lord. The same thing with the local church, right? God's leading us to do things, and we're saying, God, we don't have the people to do this. Or God, we don't have anybody that's willing to do this. How are we going to do this? We need to recognize there's nothing we can do to get people to do things. There's nothing we can do, but God can change hearts. And so every church needs to trust God and say, okay, God, you stir people's hearts up to be willing to do this thing that you want to be done. And we just need to trust in the one that can change people's hearts and ask him to. And as we're asking him to stir people up to do the things that need to be done, we need to at the same time trust that he will do it and that he will provide the people that are needed for his will to be accomplished. And so that's the first area of difficulty that we find, is that God, we can't make anybody do anything. And that's true, we can't. But God can change hearts and provide the manpower to accomplish the things that we know he is telling us to accomplish. What is the other area of difficulty that we find when we're trying to do God's will? The area of resources. God, you're calling me to do this, this, and this, but I don't have the resources, God. You want me to do this, God? That costs money. I don't have the money. We don't have the money. God, you're same, with church. God, you're leading us to do this or that. God, that requires money that we don't have. And you're wanting us to do this type of ministry. God, we don't have anybody that can do that type of ministry. We don't have anybody that is able to teach on that. We don't have anybody that's able to lead this type of a ministry, God. We don't have the resources, right? Whether it's the physical resources of money or space, or whether it's personal resources of skill and of ability, and that's so discouraging, right? When God wants you to do something, but the money's not there. God wants you to take on this role, but God, I don't have the ability to. Our church doesn't have anybody with that type of skill or ability to make this or that happen. So what do you do then when the resources are just not there? Well, number one, we just read God led people to bring in the resources, right? So we know that God will lead people to bring in the resources. But what about human ability, right? Human skill, like God, some churches find themselves in a situation where they don't have anybody that can lead worship, right? They don't know anybody that can play an instrument, or anything like that. And so they don't know what to do for worship in the church. And so what happens when it comes to not having anybody with the ability, anybody with the skill, anybody with the gifts, the gifting to do what God is calling? Then what? Because that's even harder than trying to get people to be willing to do something, right? If you don't have the ability, you don't have the skill, you don't have the gift, right? There's nothing you can do. There's absolutely nothing you can do. And I think the same problem was with Israel in building the tabernacle and all the furniture, right? They had the people that were willing to come and to give, but they were supposed to they probably had to melt metal and form it into shapes. They needed carpenters that could build. They needed people that could sew intricate patterns. They needed people with a lot of abilities. And they just didn't have it. So what did they do? Well, Exodus 35, verse 30, then Moses said to the people of Israel, "See, the Lord has called by name Bezalel, the son of Uri, son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, and he has filled him with the Spirit of God, with skill, with intelligence, with knowledge, and with all craftsmanship, to devise artistic designs, to work in gold and silver and bronze, in cutting stones for setting, in carving wood for work in every skilled craft. And he has inspired him to teach, both him and Aholiab, the son of Ahisamach of the tribe of Dan. He has filled them with skill to do every sort of work done by an engraver or by a designer or by an embroiderer in blue and purple and scarlet yarns and fine twined linen, or by a weaver, by any sort of workman or skilled designer." So not only did God provide the resources and the people, but he himself, by his Spirit, put skill and intelligence and knowledge of all craftsmanship to divine artistic designs, to work in gold and silver and bronze, for cutting stones and carving wood. He gave people these abilities, these skills to be able to make what needed to be made. God provided everything that was needed. And so just like we need to trust God to provide the people to be willing to do what needs to be done and provide the resources, the money to do it, God can put within people the skill and the ability and the gifting to do what needs to be done. He can do it. God created the world out of nothing. Ex nihilo is the phrase, out of nothing. And he still does that, creates things out of nothing. It doesn't matter in the church if God is leading us to do something. God, we don't have anybody that can do that. We don't have anybody with that skill. We don't have anybody with that gift. We don't have anybody with that ability. That doesn't matter because he can give anybody the exact skill and ability and gifting that they need to be able to do the will of God. And so what we need to understand this morning is that nothing can stop us from following God's will in our lives. Nothing. If God is saying, this is what I want you to do, and we know we need to be obedient and do it, God will provide every single thing that we need to be obedient to his will. He'll provide everything, even down to giving people the skills they need to do certain things. So no matter how difficult a situation is, whether it's at home or whether it's in church, not having no idea how you're going to be able to do the will of of God in your life, God can give you everything that's needed out of nothing to do exactly what he is calling you to do. So when Satan tries to tell you that you just can't do what God is calling you to do, it's not possible, remember, he is a liar. And his entire work in your life is dependent on you believing his lies. So remember the truth of God, Exodus 35, read that over and over and over again to remind yourself nothing can stand in the way of me being obedient to God. Nothing is going to stand in the way of our church being obedient to God if we're willing, because he'll provide everything that we need. So God bless.